Dear listeners, before we start this episode, a quick word from our sponsor DW, Deutsche Welle. In a country like ours where the population and competition are constantly growing, it's a tall task to make it in big cities like Delhi, Mumbai or Bengaluru. It requires a certain state of mind to navigate the challenges and seize the opportunities that come your way. Check out DW's inspiring 5-part TV series Megacity Mindset, showcasing trailblazing individuals across India's vibrant and influential cities. From Bollywood star Abhishek Banerjee's journey in Mumbai to pilot and high flyer Captain Zoya Agarwal breaking barriers in Delhi, each episode of Megacity Mindset offers a compelling narrative of resilience, ambition, and creativity that drive these megacities. To know what sets these remarkable personalities apart, click on the link in the description to watch DW's Megacity Mindset, currently streaming exclusively on JioCinema. Don't miss out, and remember, success begins in the mind. Now, on with the show. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to 3 Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about a report which makes recommendations on how equivalence can be achieved across different school boards in the country. We also talk about protests in Bangladesh that have caused the death of 91 people. But first, we talk about the death of 3 UPSC aspirants due to flooding of a coaching center basement. On 27th July, 3 students were found dead after the basement library of Rao's IAS, a UPSC coaching center in Rajendranagar, was flooded by rainwater accumulated on the road. Out of the 30 students who were present in the library, 27 managed to escape or were rescued, while 3 students could not escape. Rao's IAS Study Circle in Old Rajendranagar is one of the oldest and most popular coaching centers for civil services exam aspirants.
Rao being such an old coaching institute which has been there, and it's one of the most famous in all the coaching hubs like Mukherjee Nagar, Kalusarai, Old Rajendra Nagar. Even at Old Rajendra Nagar, Rao's is one of the oldest and one of the most poshest buildings in the whole street. And it has one of the highest student enrollment for UPSC aspirants.
That's Indian Express's Arnabjit Sur. Since the incident, a lot of comments have been made by political leaders. While the central government has been blaming the AAP administration, Sanjay Singh, the national spokesperson of the Aam Aadmi Party, said that they had flagged the issue of lack of drainage, but action wasn't taken and that they would be investigating the matter.
सबसे पहले तो ये बहुत ही दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण घटना है और जो छात्र इसमें मारे गए हैं, मैं उनकी आत्मा की शांति के लिए प्रभु से प्रार्थना करता हूं, ईश्वर से प्रार्थना करता हूं कि उनके परिजनों को ये अपार कष्ट जो उनके ऊपर आया है उसको सहन करने की शक्ति दे। जहां तक इस घटना का विषय है, कई कोचिंग सेंटर अपने बेसमेंट में इलीगल तरीके से लाइब्रेरी चलाते हैं, क्लासेज चलाते हैं, जो पूरी तरह से गलत है। किन अधिकारियों के साथ मिली भगत करके ये किया गया, उन पे कार्रवाई होगी।
To get a deeper insight into what happened on 27th July, we have Indian Express's Arnabjit Sur joining us. Arnabjit, can you begin by telling us what happened at the Rao IAS Study Circle last week?
So last week, around 6:45 p.m., water starts gushing into the basement. Initially, it sort of starts entering at a very gradual speed and eventually it gathers pace. There were around at least 35 to 40 students inside. Once the water starts gushing in, security guards and other students who were walking nearby, because it's a coaching hub. So every other building is a coaching center. All of them notice that and they sort of go and alert the students. So this library was in the basement and the basement starts getting flooded. Some of them are able to come out, that too with difficulty, of course, because as visible in a video that we put up online on our online copies, the water is flowing inside through the stairs and it's actually flooding, proper flooding. And you can't go against the force of the water. It's at that kind of speed. So some of the students were rescued out by fellow students, by security guards, but eventually 3 students were not able to escape because they were sort of, according to students who were rescued out, they were sitting in the last seats possible because the basement is quite big. It's the size of this building only. So it can hold around 150 students each. So it's total 300 students can sit there in the library. So they were sitting quite far from the gate of the library. So those who were towards the gate were able to rush out quickly because they noticed the water. Somehow they were not able to escape, and like they got stuck and eventually they drowned.
And Arnabjit, we heard that two of the bodies of the students were recovered around 2 hours after the incident, while the third one was recovered at 1 a.m. So, how did the security forces and the emergency services respond to this incident? Tell us a little bit about the rescue operation.
After the incident, NDRF teams, Delhi Fire Services and police teams, they carried out the rescue operation because they were alerted at 6:45, 7 only by fellow students. So the whole rescue operation took place. So they were at different levels of water. The water was around 6 to 10 feet in height, and their bodies were recovered at different heights depending on how they were able to pump out the water through water pumps. So like 4 to 5 water pumps were used to sort of pump out the water and pump them onto the road. But that was also difficult because it was coming back, because the drains were so waterlogged that the water was not able to go inside the drains. So like they were sort of coming back onto the basement. So eventually they managed to sort of pump out the water, and like first the two girls' bodies were recovered and then the guy's body was recovered after midnight. So they were taken to the nearby hospital and they were declared dead on arrival. Officers had told me that the chances are very less of them surviving because even they were not able to get inside the divers and all because the water was so dirty. So it took a lot of time. After that kind of a long drawn operation, there was very less chances of them surviving. So yeah, after that thing, the bodies were taken out, the water was completely pumped out, and like all three of them were declared dead.
And the students who escaped or were rescued, how did they describe their experience?
A few students were saved. One of the students we did speak to, his name is Anmol. He was sitting near the gate. So like we did a story on that, on how like basically what happened, how was the situation. So he said that like that the whole city is flooding and like even his building has flooded. He actually described it as straight out of a movie scene because suddenly they see that their library is getting completely inside water, something that they never expected. So he went on a walk and then he had come back inside the library. When he had come back after 5-10 minutes, the incident happened, and he described how these three students who drowned, they were sitting quite far. He said that's one of the possible reasons why they were not able to escape. Because he described how security guards were the first ones to come down, because security guards were the first one to sort of cut off the electricity supply so that nobody gets electrocuted. So they cut off the supply and then they started screaming that aise pani aa raha hai, sab niklo, sab niklo. And simultaneously police also came. They also started alerting students. So by that time, like who were in the front, most of them, including Anmol, they escaped somehow. Fellow UPSC aspirants and batchmates were also responsible for saving most of them. Like the casualty could have been more, but they had the courage to sort of get some of them out. But when the water level got really beyond limit, then they thought that yeah, there are some people who are stuck. So that's why everybody was called. DFS was called, police was called, and eventually NDRF teams were called, the divers.
A heated debate erupted in the Lok Sabha post the tragic incident. Several leaders, including BJP leader Bansuri Swaraj, Congress leader Shashi Tharoor, and Samajwadi Party leader Akhilesh Yadav raised their concerns over the incident.
The cause of death of these three students is the utter and absolute apathy of the Aam Aadmi Party ruling dispensation in Delhi. The criminal negligence of the ruling dispensation of the Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi has caused the death of these three students.
There is, sadly, a level of violations of basic norms when it comes to building codes, fire safety, flood safety, and so on. That is rampant in the city. The corporation also has responsibility on this. So I have seen in the hands of a journalist a certificate of clearance issued on the 9th of July, sir, by the corporation, allowing these people to do what they're doing.
अखिलेश जी, बहुत गंभीर समस्या है और जो घटना हुई है दर्दनाक घटना है. यूपीएससी के स्टूडेंट जो तैयारी कर रहे थे, आखिरकार प्लानिंग और एनओसीज देने की जिम्मेदारी तो सभी अधिकारियों की है. अध्यक्ष महोदय, जिम्मेदार कौन है, उनके खिलाफ कार्रवाई क्या हो रही है? नंबर 1. दूसरा, ये केवल एक विषय नहीं है इलीगल बिल्डिंग. हम तो यूपी से अध्यक्ष जी देख रहे हैं, जहां इलीगल बिल्डिंग बनती है वहां बुलडोजर चलता है. क्या ये सरकार बुलडोजर चलाएगी कि नहीं चलाएगी?
We just heard excerpts of what happened at the Lok Sabha post the incident. And Arnabjit, have any FIRs been lodged and any arrests been made in the case?
Yeah, FI was registered on the same day, and essentially, 7 people were arrested, including the owner, coordinator, and the owners of the basement. So there are owner of the center, and the basements are different. The basement they had given on lease to the coaching center. So out of the 7 persons, these were the persons, and there was one driver also. He was driving an SUV basically. So he was booked under the same FIR, which is under culpable homicide, not amounting to murder. But then charges were dropped after the whole thing happened, caused furor in the court and all. And like court also pulled up police for like implicating him as such. Like it was made no sense. But the driver was also arrested because the force with which he drove the vehicle, as visible in the video, it led to one of the gates collapsing, and that was his crime. So when the gate collapsed, the water gushed in at a much more higher speed. So that's why he was also booked. He was arrested, but now he has been granted bail. The rest of them are in judicial custody. So yeah, total 7 persons arrested.
And what rules were being flouted by the building, and what red flags have been discovered?
The flaws included, according to the police, that the owner of the coaching center did not have documents to justify why he was using the library in a basement, basically. It's mentioned in the FIR when he was asked to show documents, he didn't have any. That was one. Second, he was asked if the basement had any drainage system, anything of that sort. So, like the owner said that he didn't have any proof to show that there was any drainage system. So, nothing of that, no safeguards were there. There was one entry point, but there was one fire exit at the back. There was one back door, but that remained mostly closed. So that was also something that the police found as not permitted, because like essentially in a basement, you should ideally have a fire exit or like a second exit. So that's one of the reasons that probably caused the stampede, because there was no fire exit at the back. So like everybody had to rush in through the front. So that was another flaw that police found. The owner had been running the library in the basement since several years now. Ever since the Rouse Center was set up here. So police had mentioned this only, that this was illegal, and the owner had no documents and no legitimate approvals from any of the municipal authorities or any previous inspections to show why he was using the same as that. And some students also pointed out to the owner that the basement was being used, and like there had been incidents in the past where waterlogging happened and some amount of water did enter the basement. They did flag this in the past, but that was to no avail.
And how has the coaching center responded to the incident?
The statement was like default only, like we are cooperating with this thing and deeply saddened with the losses and all. But at that time, we did try to contact Rouse, but nobody from the main office picked up our calls. Now I think they have given compensation to the family of the students now. But that's something that the families aren't accepting. And the father of Neville recently joined the protest, which is happening at Old Rajendra Nagar among the UPSC aspirants. So he is questioning why did the incident happen in the first place, plus compensation is nothing to sort of suffice whatever happened. And another thing is that like the statements and all are something that essentially in an incident of such a magnitude they have to issue. The question is that essentially it's a bailable offense. In the whole fire incident had happened last year where I think Sanskriti and Drishti IS, their floors caught fire. And if you would have seen videos at that time, students sort of crawled through the ropes and all, and it was like a huge fire and all happened. One woman sort of banged her head. So at that time, the owners were arrested, but like they got bail, and the case hasn't been charge sheeted yet. So that's why all these basement owners and all who have been these 4 brothers, basement owners who have been arrested, and Abhishek Gupta, Deshpal Singh, all of these are mostly employees sort of. And eventually they will be granted bail. But it's just that no higher officials are implicated in this eventually. And that's what the parents of all the 3 people who died told us, that nobody at the higher up hierarchy will take responsibility for this. And compensation is something that is very, like, it's a negligible thing when such a big incident has happened. And it's not like getting shut due to this. Essentially, everybody will go to Rouse, like it's one of the biggest institutes. But I think the family members and the students aren't happy with the response that Rouse has shown towards the incident.
Arnabjit, like we just heard, students have been protesting post this incident against the coaching centers and their facilities. So what kind of concerns does a tragic incident like this raise?
So the whole basement culture has been a thing across Delhi. So basements, we have done stories on this over the past week since the incident happened, on how basements are used essentially for commercial purposes, not for as a dumping ground, which according to rules, it should be used as a storehouse at max. But basements are used for commercial purposes by most proprietors and all. So since it has happened at a UPSC study center, that has sort of caused a furor, and it's a concern for most of the students, and rightly so. And so that's something that they have raised. Like several waterlogging incidents had happened in the past, and even like 3-4 days back when these rains and all happened, Rajendra Nagar got flooded again. So the drainage system is an issue there that has been flagged by several students, but nobody has listened to that. And that's why it's a concern, because like libraries ideally shouldn't be situated out of basements, because that's one of the most essential places that UPSC aspirants spend their time at, apart from like attending classes and all. That's something that should have been noted. That's that. And also several inspections and all haven't happened in the past. That's why the students are like, that should happen. And like several of the students did tell me that today this coaching center has flooded. Like tomorrow any coaching center can get flooded, like essentially the basement. That's why you see a lot of basements have been shut down through police and MCD. Around, I think, more than a dozen basements were shut down. Essentially the concern is something happens and then only MCD, police and all sort of wake up.
And next we talk about an effort to achieve equivalence amongst school boards. PARAKH, a standard-setting body under the NCERT, has recently submitted to the Ministry of Education an equivalence report which makes recommendations on how equivalence can be achieved across different school boards in the country. To understand what this means with regards to the various boards that exist in India and how equivalence can be achieved, we have Indian Express's Abhinaya Harigovind joining us. Abhinaya, can you begin by telling us a bit about PARAKH, the standard-setting body under NCERT, and why was it formed?
So PARAKH is an acronym that stands for Performance Assessment Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. It's a body that functions under the NCERT. And the PARAKH's mandates include things like carrying out achievement surveys. It has prepared these holistic progress cards that are now proposed to be in use across schools in the country. And one of his mandates is working with the school boards to bring equivalence in across these different boards in the country. And the National Education Policy of 2020 actually makes the provision for PARAKH and specifies these things as its mandate.
And what does achieving equivalence across school boards mean exactly?
So equivalence refers to setting certain standards or benchmarks that boards will be required to meet or achieve. So this is because school boards across the country now look very different from each other. So the point of equivalence, at least how PARAKH's equivalence report as submitted to the Education Ministry says, is that it sets certain standards for these different school boards across 5 main parameters or categories. And that is administration, which is of administration of the board itself, curriculum, the inclusiveness in the schools that are affiliated to the boards, infrastructure, again, of the schools that are affiliated to the boards, and assessment. So the point then of equivalence is to make sure that there is some standard or benchmark that all of the different boards in the country are now adhering to.
And Abhinaya, why is there a need to achieve equivalence when it comes to the various school boards in India?
So the school boards across the country now look very different from each other. Some boards are considered to be better than others, or some are considered to be more difficult or easier than others, because there are a total of 69 school boards, which includes all of the state boards. It includes CBSE, ICSE, the open boards. There are vocational boards. There are madrasa boards. There are the Sanskrit boards. All of these boards look very different from each other in terms of their curriculum, in terms of how they're assessing students, in terms of how the boards themselves are structured and how they function.
And what recommendations were made by PARAKH in its report?
So one of the key recommendations that PARAKH makes in its equivalence report is in terms of assessment. So the assessment recommendation suggests that in the class 12 assessment, which is in the class 12 report card, a student's performance in class 9, 10, 11 and 12 will count towards the final marks that the student gets in class 12. So about 15% of the students' marks in class 9, 20% in class 10, 25% for class 11 and 40% for class 12, which is the highest, will go into the student's final assessment in class 12. So at the end of class 12, the student will get a cumulative scorecard is what the recommendations say. And one of the ways that PARAKH has recommended that equivalence be achieved is by assessing a student's performance in terms of credits and not just marks. So the students' performance in a whole range of activities in class, in terms of discussions, in terms of projects, all of that, as well as the final evaluation in an examination will then be assessed in terms of credits. So the student will get a certain number of credits for each subject, for all of these activities, for pursuing online courses. So that is another key recommendation that it makes in terms of assessment.
Right. And what were some other recommendations that were put forward by PARAKH in order to achieve equivalence across different school boards?
There are a few other recommendations that it makes in terms of question papers themselves, because the difficulty level of these question papers across boards is now very different. So PARAKH recommends that for class 9 and for class 11, the boards develop a question bank from where teachers can then draw their questions to ensure that the question papers are standardized. PARAKH also makes recommendations for things like administration of the boards, measures to prevent cheating in examinations, security measures. It also asks that all boards adhere to the National Curriculum Framework for School Education to ensure standardization across the curriculum in all boards.
And what method was used by PARAKH in order to research and sort of come up with these recommendations?
So PARAKH spent a year evaluating these boards first. So it assessed 32 boards across these 5 parameters, that is administration, curriculum, assessment, infrastructure, and inclusiveness. And this was to determine what the boards look like now in order to be able to set the benchmarks for them. PARAKH has used 2 tools to assess the board's current performance. One is a questionnaire, and the other was to analyze the question papers that these boards have set over the past 2 years.
And Abhinaya, what is the way forward from here as far as the various school boards are concerned?
PARAKH is now holding conferences with the boards to figure out the way forward. So the boards will now be required to prepare a sort of roadmap to achieve these benchmarks. And PARAKH is also saying that funding is likely for these boards to achieve these benchmarks. So in the first conference with the state boards that was held in July, it was held with representatives of 7 state boards. And these boards had actually differed in their suggestion for the assessment, which is that instead of a cumulative score at the end of class 12, which would reflect performance from class 9, 10, 11 and 12, these boards were suggesting that the class 10 marks will include the score for class 9 and class 10. And the class 12 marks will include the score for class 11 and class 12. So that is a certain percentage of the score in class 9 would also be reflected in the score for class 10. And a percentage of the score for class 11 would be reflected in the final score in class 12. A final conclusion in these terms is yet to be reached, and it will depend on the states and what their suggestions and recommendations are for this.
And in the end, we talk about the protests that have been happening in Bangladesh. Fresh violence in Bangladesh left at least 91 people, including 14 policemen, dead and hundreds injured, PTI quoted local newspaper Prothom Alo as saying. This prompted the Assistant High Commission of India in Sylhet to ask its nationals to remain alert and launched a helpline number. The violence resumed when those sitting for a non-cooperation movement announced by the students' movement demanding Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's resignation clashed with supporters of the Awami League, Chhatra League and Jubo League activists. Demonstrators are demanding Hasina's resignation after earlier protests in July that began with students calling for an end to a quota system for the government jobs, escalated into violence that left more than 200 dead. In the capital, protesters took away the bodies of 4 people from Dhaka Medical College Hospital. The protesters went to Central Shaheed Minar with the bodies of the 4 victims and chanted anti-government slogans. Protesters also dismissed PM Sheikh Hasina's invitation for dialogue aimed at quelling escalating violence and consolidated their demands into a unified call for government's resignation. Protest coordinators had called on students from schools, colleges, universities, private universities and madrasas, as well as workers, professionals, political activists and other public members to participate in the protests. As the violence raged, Hasina said that those who were engaging in the sabotage and the destruction in the name of protests were no longer students but criminals, and said that the people should deal with them with iron hands. The government announced a holiday from Monday to Wednesday. Courts will remain closed for an indefinite period, and mobile internet service was off yesterday, while Facebook and messaging apps including WhatsApp were inaccessible even on broadband internet. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Niharika Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.